Yes, yeah. Or soda.
It's extra small.
That's it. Extra small arms.
Yeah. So I think we're live.
We're not live.
No.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Technology.
Technology, don't you?
How do we do it?
It might be live.
Oh,
Look at that, beautiful.
John.
That's you.
And we're live. Welcome everyone, as the piece of paper says. This is Henley Swim Live with Professor Greg Whyte.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Here for the evening to have a bit of a chat with co-founders myself, Jeremy Lehman, and Tom Keane. I'll put a bit of paper down there. Good professional. So hello and welcome to the second Henley Swim Facebook Live. As I say, I'm Jeremy Lehman, co-founder of Henley Swim. This is actually the second time that we've done this. We did this a few years back now.
3 years ago.
Was it 3 years ago?
It seems like a year. It's 3.
Last time 2017. This is my co-founder, as mentioned before, Tom Keane. We started that race by accident, 2004, the Henley Classic.
Definitely accident.
I think the premise was that I was giving up rowing, and I think you had already given up rowing,
Yeah.
and you were going to show me how to swim.
Yeah.
And your idea for the best way of learning how to swim open water was to jump in at 4 in the morning, swim up the Henley course. And thus, that was basically the start of the Henley Classic. Anyway, I digress. This time we're lucky enough to be joined by no less than an old friend, fabulous Greg Whyte, former Olympian, 2-time modern pentathlon, Olympic Games. Remind me, Greg, which Olympics were?
92 and 96, a long time ago.
Atlanta and Barcelona.
Barcelona, 92.
He's, of course, much more than an Olympian. He's a leading expert in the world of sport and exercise science and physiology. Very well known for his work with comic relief. How many comic reliefs have you done, Greg?
That might be a question later.
That's not
That's
good.
That's
a question later.
Yeah, you see. Who started the
Just trying to
prize?
In 2014, you were awarded an OBE for services to sport, sport science and charity. And since 2006, you've helped raise, are we allowed to say this one?
Yeah, I think so.
That's not a question.
Yeah, that's not a question.
You've been involved in raising 45 million for charity. So
Yeah,
Greg, we first met when you came along and did the Henley Classic for the first time. In fact, I think your picture's up on the wall here somewhere. When you came along and danced up the course in the fog, I think it was, in 2009.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think you had a comic relief or sports relief wetsuit on that day. It was blazing, I seem to remember.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's how we first met. So we've known each other for about, we've all known each other for at least 10 years now. And you've been coming along to our events ever since, very frankly, and telling lots of people about them as well, which has been very kind. We've got a bit of a long-standing relationship. So tonight then is really about giving people the opportunity for a bit of a Q&A. We've got Greg here for the evening and his expertise. Greg's fairly recently written a book called Achieve the Impossible, which I'm reading at the moment. It's a great book. I wanted to start this off. It's obviously a key time of year. People have boldly set out their New Year's resolutions. I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to base camp, I'm going to run a marathon, I'm going to go and swim this, I'm going to cycle this, or whatever it might be. And I think the rather staggering statistics are that by somewhere around mid-January, upward of 90-95% of these New Year's resolutions have been jacked in and fallen by the wayside. Now, I was very struck by a speech that I was lucky enough to attend that you gave at the Aspire dinner last year, the award ceremony dinner, which was great, where you gave what I think was a great example of how you brought David Walliams down to earth with a bang, based on how he was going about talking about his Swim the Channel, and how you had some concerns about his mindset and how he was vocalising that and saying that. I thought it'd be a nice place to start, just to retell that bit of the story, because I think that links in nicely then to talking about that objective setting.
Yeah, for sure.
If that's all right.
Well, it's almost like a classic story, in the sense that we had 33 weeks of training. So I took David Walliams from a reasonable swimmer. He could just about make a mile in the pool, And 33 weeks later, as we know, he successfully swam the English Channel in one of the fastest times that year. An incredible achievement, 10 hours, 28 minutes. Really impressive. But in the very early part of the training, obviously David didn't realise how gargantuan this challenge was, how difficult swimming the Channel is. Incredibly difficult swim. And we were in a change room after a session once in the pool, in the changing room. Somebody came up to him and said, "Oh, David, I saw you doing a session. What have you been up to?" And he said, he said, "Next year I'm swimming the English Channel." Which to me was like alarm bells. You know, it's that classic about New Year's resolutions. Oh yeah, by the end of January I'm going to lose 6 stone. And you're thinking, unless you're going to remove a limb, that simply isn't going to happen. But it's the same for David. And almost immediately after that, so this was quite a way out, and it was in October time. We've been training since the July, August. We went up to Eton Dorney and we did our first open water swimming session, and the water temperature was identical as it was going to be for our Channel Challenge in July the following year, around about 14 degrees centigrade. And in he went, and it was tough. I mean, he had a significant cold shock response. If you go onto my website, you can actually watch it. It's hysterical to watch, but incredibly dangerous. And he lasted 35 minutes that day. We're in skins. And on the way out...
Which is pretty impressive, actually.
No, he's tough. I mean, yeah. I can tell you, Dave Williams is one of the toughest people I've ever met. Incredibly tenacious, very driven, and really, really hard. I mean, the guy trained hard for that. It wasn't by luck that he swam the English Channel. But we got out of the session that day, and he was cold. And into the changing rooms, and actually one of the rowers came over and said, "Oh, David, I saw you swimming, and what are you doing?" And he looked at him in the eye and he said, "Next year I am attempting to swim the English Channel." And that, to me, it was actually an incredibly important point, because what that did is it just changed that mindset from the fact is that nothing good comes easy. He was attempting to take on a challenge that only around about, at the time, 40% of people were successful at. It was an incredibly difficult challenge. So for him to recognise that it was an attempt and that he was going to have to work hard, effectively set the scene for the rest of the training. And the rest of the training was, he didn't miss a single session from that point to the point of the Channel itself. And that was despite being on the biggest comedy tour in history with Little Britain at the time. Never missed a session. Wow. And that was the turning point, I think. I think that's recognising that if it's worth doing, it's going to be difficult, and you have to get that mindset initially. So when it comes to things like New Year's resolutions, it's exactly the same thing. Is that you've got to think, if you're trying to achieve it, it should be worth achieving. That means it's going to be difficult. And so what it comes down to is how you structure that planning. And the book really sort of articulates that planning process about setting of goals, long-term goals, medium-term goals, and short-term goals along that pathway to reaching that ultimate long-term goal. Getting the planning right is everything, because if the planning's wrong, it's a recipe for disaster. So it critically does matter how you do it sequentially, how you set it out, how you structure it. And in doing that, it's then about the application of that and the delivery of that plan.
And I guess that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So some of these questions, as they start to come in, there's going to be a variety of people here, some of which who are pretty clued into that. They understand where they are, what they can achieve, but others who could be newer and might be setting themselves some really unrealistic goals to be going for. What's that key message then? As you're setting, set yourself a big goal. Yeah. But what's the key message about New Year's resolutions and setting yourselves goals?
Well, do you know what? I think first off, I don't think there are very few goals that are unrealistic. I think that's the point. Is that actually dream big. Yeah. I think that's my most important message: is dream big. For example, something like the Thames Marathon that you guys organise is a very tough challenge. But what a challenge to achieve! Having swum that 14 kilometres along the River Thames, incredible achievement. Dream big. The critical things around that, having had the dream, having set that goal, what really matters is how you plan to deliver on that goal. That's the critical thing. So don't let others sway you from going for something really big. Don't let others say, because actually invariably what we are is we're bounded by what others think. We create enough barriers for ourselves, thinking, "Oh, we can't do that. I'll never be able to make that." And then actually, often people around us will tell us exactly the same thing, and that reinforces this message that we can't do it. Break away from that, set a big goal, tell everybody about it, but then make sure you spend the right amount of time in actually structuring that plan. And I think the key to that plan actually is time. Often I think the reason why many people fail when it comes to New Year's resolutions or when it comes to big goals is because of the time, the time resource that they give themselves, is that they simply don't give themselves enough time. You know, New Year's resolution is a classic. I'm going to lose 3 stone by the end of January.
Yeah.
You know, I think clearly that is never going to happen because it's just, and if it does, it's probably unhealthy and unsustainable. So making sure you've got the right time to it. So, you know, if the Thames Marathon is your goal, what you've got to be thinking about, the Thames Marathon training starts right now. You know, the planning starts right now. And what you should be looking at is actually the great thing about the Henley Swims is that what you've got is you've got that sequential movement through it up to the marathon. So you can do the classic, you can do the Henley Mile, you can then progress in length and in experience, so that you end up with, at the end of the season in August, with the marathon. So there's a structure already there. What you need to do is actually plan your structure around what exists. And if you do that well,
because I remember when we first jumped in back in 2004, you and me were thinking this is really exciting, you know, really dangerous, really adventurous. And actually, the following year it wasn't, and the following year it became even more. So we normalised it, didn't we?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you didn't know that you could do this, you probably wouldn't do it. But when you see somebody else jumping in and doing it, you think, no way am I
It's
doing
that
14K.
further, faster, longer. That's why you end up with things like the Norseman triathlon at the end.
It's very pretty normalised, isn't it?
We are always pushing the limits, and I think we push the limits generally. We watch people. You know, we watched this year or last year now the first sub-2-hour marathon. You know, we're constantly pushing those boundaries. But what you have to remember is, I think sometimes elite sport in general, in my opinion, is entertainment. I don't necessarily think it's inspirational, because many people watch elite sport and think, well, these are different breeds. But actually, for me, what they do is they articulate the point which is salient for all of us, and that is actually we can all push our limits, our own personal limits. That doesn't mean to say we'll run a sub-2-hour marathon. What it does mean is we can run a marathon with the right preparation. So it's just about that planning, which is crucial.
Should we do a quick competition?
Go for it, yeah.
All right.
Shall we go back to the original question then? How many sport and comic relief challenges has Greg coached? And so the prize is going to be one of your books?
Well, my book's signed. Yep. So signed.
That's Achieve the Impossible.
Yep.
And how many? Sport relief and comic relief.
Yeah, events, not people. So what you've got to do is you've got to Facebook message, and then what we'll do is
Facebook Live, just message it in there, yeah.
And then we'll read out the first person that gets to the right answer. And we'll set a time limit on it, and if they haven't got exactly the right answer, we'll get the closest person to it. So you've got 5 minutes, okay? I'll time it.
So the purpose of this evening is not so much about us, guys, it's about you out there. This is really an interactive session. So we've got some questions already lined up, but what we would really like is for you to start firing the questions through. We've got the lovely Juliet and Becky on the sides here who you can't see, and they're going to be handing us questions as we go through it. Very excited. I've just been handed a note saying Cap is here. Now, most people won't know what that means, but we do. That means Keri-Anne Payne is in the house. Welcome, Keri-Anne.
Hey, Keri-Anne.
2-time world champion, 1-time Olympic silver medalist. We're very, very pleased to have Keri-Anne here. Absolute legend, yes. She's competed in some of our events, and she's been along here a few times. We love seeing the Cat, so thanks very much for coming along. If anyone has any questions, by the way, for Keri-Anne, she's literally online now, and we're hoping she'll stay for the hour. So do fire in your questions if you'd like to ask her something specifically. There are a few people in the world more experienced in swimming the marathon distance than Keri-Anne Payne, so very pleased to have her along here. So we've got a good amount of people watching us now, so that's great. We'll crack on with the first question. We've got Sam Blanchard who's got the first question. I'll just read it out for you if that's all right, Greg. I'm training for a long swim. It's taking me around an hour and a half before I can settle into my breathing during a swim session, where it starts to get very disorganized and sometimes panicked. Once it settles, I can swim for a couple of hours. Nothing changes with my technique. Is this common, is the first bit. Is there something I could do to get better control of my breathing earlier? I'll just give a little bit of background here, and I'll remind you of the question. Okay?
Yes,
Sam was raising money for awareness and money for progressive supranuclear palsy, PSP, for swimming around the Isle of Wight, a notoriously tough challenge, as Greg knows. He's banking on about 24, 26 hours, then cycling around the Isle of Wight, 93 kilometres, and then running across the Isle of Wight, and he's calling that the Trial of Wight, to look up online.
Like it.
Very good. So just to remind the question then, is there something I could do to get better control of my breathing earlier when I'm doing a swim?
Do you know, it's a classic response, and it is the cold shock response. So effectively, as mammals, what we have is we have receptors in our skins, particularly around the face, which when we get into cold water, we have cold exposure. There's a whole host of different things that happen. Number one is that we get an increase in blood pressure. Number two is that we get this hyperventilation. So most of us have recognised this. The interesting other one that you get is you get diuresis. So when you go out in the cold, you always need to pee really quickly. So that's cold-induced diuresis. But it's that hyperventilation which is really important. In fact, that cold shock response is incredibly important to control because it is responsible for over 80% of open water deaths through drowning because of the hyperventilation. You've only actually got to aspirate, breathe in about 1.5 litres of salty water to actually start the drowning process. And when you're hyperventilating, as an individual, you're hyperventilating somewhere in the region of 100 to 150 litres a minute. It's very simple to see how you can take in 1.5 litres. So controlling that cold shock response, very, very important. That's the first thing. Why is that important here? Well, that is important because what happens is after around about 5 exposures, so the first time you go into cold open water, it's really quite exaggerated.
What temperature? How cold does it have to be? Because it doesn't have to be that cold.
No, it doesn't have to be that cold at all. And it's anything that causes a response from these receptors on the skin.
And that's depending on the person, so it's very individual.
Yeah, very individual. Yeah. Obviously, it's colder than body temperature, so you won't get it when you're in the Caribbean. Yeah. And generally, you don't get it when you're in the pool. So you can swim in pools circa 28 degrees centigrade. When they put the pool down to 26 for racing, often you do see some people actually respond a little bit to that. Yeah. So it hasn't got to be cold at all. But the thing that you get is after 5 exposures, around 5 exposures, it dampens down that cold shock response quite dramatically. Yeah. And so what you'll find with experienced open water swimmers, cold water swimmers, is they don't get the same sort of response, but they still get a response. So there is still a modicum of hyperventilation. And that lasts for somewhere in the region, on initial entry, lasts for somewhere in the region of about 1 to 2 minutes. So what's being described here by Sam?
It was half an hour, wasn't it?
What Sam's described, but most people describe it for 200 meters. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they start to relax into it. So actually, what it probably is, it's albeit that the dramatic cold shock response is gone, it's still a modicum of cold shock response. So the best advice I can give is one of 2 things. Number one is make sure that you see me do it. Most experienced swimmers do it open water. Splash the face with water before you get in. Splash the back of your neck.
It's a horrible thing to do, but you've got to do it.
It makes a massive difference.
Yeah, really does.
Because then what happens is you get the cold shock response before actually submerging. And then of course, because when you submerge, then energy expenditure rises because you then start to swim and you require more oxygen during that period. So if you're already hyperventilating, if metabolic rate has risen, all of a sudden you put yourself into a little bit of trouble. The other key thing to do is always start off easy. And that's counterintuitive, because when you get into cold water, you think, I'm going to hammer the first couple of minutes to try and warm up. And of course, what that does, it exacerbates the problem. So for Sam, what I would say is make sure you always douse yourself with cold water before you start. Give yourself a chance to acclimatise, and then progressively increase pace over the first sort of 3 to 5 minutes.
I mean, what I've noticed, I did a thing, and there's a friend of mine on board who Tom knows as well, Katia, who's now here as well. We did a trip last year with Men's Fitness magazine, and up to Scotland, where we swam in 4 or 5 degree water. And I'm not a good, she'll be laughing when I'm dishing out advice about cold water when I'm not very good at it. But what was really noticeable for me is doing it regularly for a period and building up to it. Not only did I kind of get through that, I then started to enjoy it. There was clearly a painful bit to start with, but I started to enjoy it. But, and this is a big but, there was still, once I'd got over that mental side of things, I could control myself in that water, there are still people who are just way better than it, physiologically, than I am, and they can last longer. So I guess there must be a physiological, everyone's,
difference, isn't it?
No, I mean, what makes them, the important point here actually is that it's a body surface area to mass ratio makes a difference. Okay, so
body surface area to mass.
Body surface area to mass. So what you find with children and with geriatrics, older people, is that what they have a large skin area, but so body surface area is very large, but they don't have much mass beneath it.
Right. Okay.
And so what you find with children and the elderly is that they cool much more rapidly. And on top of that is the insulation layer. Is that actually if you've got subcutaneous fat, then what that does, it acts pretty much similar to a wetsuit, is that it creates an insulating layer beneath it.
So there's a lot of margin in having some biocreme.
And then there is some biocreme, and it does make a difference. Because my attitude is, and you and I, in fact, all three of us are pretty much the same. We're quite ectomorph, quite long, quite muscular, but with low fat mass. Is that actually the faster you swim, the greater the generation of heat, and so the warmer you'll stay. So I think actually, if you are skinny, I wouldn't be afraid of cold open water. What you want to do is make sure you train yourself to be able to swim quick. If you can swim,
that's what you notice with the elites, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
They get in like that, but then they're almost overheating.
And so is it connected to ice cream head, as people call it? Is that part of the same physiological response?
That's slightly different. So what you're doing there, the brain itself is actually quite close to the back of the mouth. And so when you're taking in cold fluids and ice cream, etc., effectively what you do is you're actually causing a cooling of the brain, and that's why you get that real sort of ice cream head feeling. Different to whole body cooling, because what we're doing there really, as well as cooling the periphery, what we are doing is we're cooling the core body temperature. The core body temperature is falling like that.
Because I know from experience, I don't get it so bad myself, but looking at other people, they can be quite severely affected by it. And I'm just wondering if Sam has the same sort of issue as well. He doesn't mention it. But, it's quite unpleasant, isn't it?
I mean, I think in very cold water, everybody experiences this. I don't care how experienced they are. Is that those first couple of minutes getting your face in the water, like at this time of the year, even with a wetsuit on, just the face immersion. But then what happens is that you do adapt to that. You get used to that.
So there's a real margin in it.
Well, you almost understand the process you're going through.
Can I just quickly, we've got a winner. So the book competition, Vicky Elson Smith, 23 is the answer. Well done, Vicky. So that'll be on its way to you.
So the next question we just got has come in. I've got a few on the list here. But we've got one from Robert Robinson, and that's specifically for Keri-Anne. Keri-Anne, if you're listening. Keri-Anne, Robert's asked, and we'll ask Greg the same question as well, and just see if there's a difference between.
Well, see. Agree with me.
Is bilateral breathing essential for a swim such as the Thames Marathon? Now, I'm sure Keri will have strong views on that, but Greg, what's your take? Yeah,
yes, the answer to that. I think what's interesting about it is that what we do when we first learn to swim, invariably people are taught to swim by breathing unilaterally, which is just the wrong way to start. I think what you want to do is start to swim bilaterally, because as a novice swimmer, effectively, and you see them, people who swim unilaterally as novice swimmers, they have a limp, and they limp along like this. Add on top of that, it's 14 kilometers long. You're going to be out there a very, very long time. If you are literally, effectively stressing one side of the body constantly over that prolonged period of time, what you'll end up with is you'll end up with issues with the neck, with the shoulder, with the back and the hips. And so, in essence, I think that when you are learning to swim, we should be teaching bilateral. The immediate response to that answer is then, but I watch X and Y elite athlete, and they do it unilaterally. They do it unilaterally because they are incredibly well trained to do it unilaterally. And in fact, there are very few, and Keri will tell you this, that very few open water swimmers who don't do it bilaterally or don't mix it. So they won't swim constantly.
You'll notice they'll switch side. They
Yeah,
might be on the same side for a
the same
while.
side.
Yeah, and then
They'll
we saw it at Rio last year. Somebody, you have to be eagle-eyed, and actually they take an immediate breath to the other side.
Yeah.
They just and Sun Yang, the 1500 meters or
Yeah.
he does lots of breaths, but he does definitely do both sides.
So breathing both sides is important. And I mean, tactically and technically, that's one reason, but tactically it's important as well, because actually, depending on your position in the water, what you want to do is see everybody who's around you. And when you are sighting, obviously most people, we talk about sighting as if sighting's up in front. When you do the Thames Classic, you can sight with the boys. You can sight. You can sight by the bank.
Yeah.
But you can't do that if you're not looking at the bank.
Yeah, exactly.
So tactically, there's a real value to being bilateral as well.
So what's the best way to force yourself to do it? Because I mean, I'm guilty of
Tell you
doing
what, let me just, because Keri-Anne's just come back.
What's she come back with? Agree with me, Keri.
To add to the breathing question, most people are breathing in far too much oxygen when they swim. For some reason, we've been told to fill and empty our lungs. However, when we ever do this in normal life? Yeah, good point. The key is to breathe in less when you swim, only as much as you need, not as much as you think you need. If you add over breathing to cold water, there can be a real horrible experience. I know exactly what Keri-Anne means there. And it's all about that sort of getting yourself up out of the water, trying to stroke out of balance and everything as well. And you see that with newer swimmers. But yeah, that's a great point, and I think complements very nicely what you're doing.
So forgetting to breathe out as well is a common fault in words, isn't it? You're forever gasping for air, but you're not breathing out enough, and that's the exhalation of CO2.
I think probably the two things is relax is what Keri-Anne's saying. I think it's just relax into it, and actually what you do is you find that rhythm. I think the ball boys actually breathe out underwater, because often what you see with novice swimmers is that what they try and do is turn their head and then breathe out and in whilst they're there, and the timing of that fundamentally upsets the timing. Think about either trickle breathe or explosive breathe. So when you're in the water, what you do is you're just trickling that air out before taking the breath, or just prior to turning the head out, you explosive breathe the contents and then take the air in. And what that'll do is that just gives you that rhythm. And that's really what you're looking for, that relaxed.
So quick top tip on forcing yourself to bilateral breathe, because personally, I breathe generally to one side.
Yeah, we'll do
so many people do. It's a real pain to force yourself to do it. What are the top tips for that one?
Get someone with a big stick to beat you every time you do it wrong.
I'm just going to do a few shout outs to some of the crew that we've got on board here. We've got Sabrina de Orizondio. I hope I pronounced that right. Doesn't sound like I have.
It doesn't sound like it.
Well, you give that a go.
No, you're in charge.
We've got John Lloyd, we've got Lee Grauker, we've got Lauren Turner, we've got Rachel Jane, we've got Katia Bastia. Hi, Katia. We've got Simon J. Backer, we've got Dave Candler, we've got Alex Hugh, we've got Laura Mayfield, we've got Dave Candler, we've got Katrina Smith, we've got a big long list of people, so it's really great.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Michelle Ferret was the next person on my list here. Michelle has got a very similar question, basically building on Sam's point. Yeah, this me too. It takes me 400 meters to settle and have trouble controlling my breathing, especially in a race. So hopefully, Michelle, that's ticked off most of the question there for you. Our next question on the list is...
Just on that, though, what's interesting, and you often see this, particularly at the Henley events, I notice it, but actually whenever I race open water, is that there, and I think somebody else has asked a question about warming up. Is that often what you find with the Henley swims is people they come to the start line late, jump in, and then boom, away they go.
Yeah.
And then they wonder why after 200 meters they're struggling. I mean, there's an anaerobiosis about that, because basically just kicking off too hard and too fast. But much of that is they just haven't switched everything on. What you have to think about, the warm up is about switching it on. And I think if you're struggling in the first 400 meters of an event, it's because you've gone out too hard and you haven't warmed up.
Well, if I think through the warm-ups we used to do for rowing 2,000 meters, it was about half an hour, 40 minutes, including like 250s, 300s.
So on our events, I mean, we try and give people a decent warm-up, but it's not always possible. So, it's a swimming event. What are the top tips for warming up on land for a swimming event?
Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both will work equally as well. It depends on what we're trying to do with warm up. It's an interesting one because in scientific literature now, there's a bit of a debate whether you should warm up or not warm up. My answer to it is always, I have never seen, and I've been to 7 Olympic Games and multiple World Championships. I have never seen an elite athlete enter an event without warming up. So if you're looking for an answer for it, I would look to see what the best in the world do, and they always warm up. But I think effectively what we're doing by warming up is that we are, multiple things, but we're increasing temperature. Both core body temperature, but particularly specifically muscle temperature of the muscles that are going to be doing the work, number one. I think number two, we are looking at increasing mobility. So some stretching on land would work really very nicely for that. And critically, I think, as well as the physical changes, what we're also doing is we're just psychologically prepping. So what we're basically doing is saying to ourselves, switch on now, start to focus, start to concentrate. Because we've all done it where you turned up late to a race and got in, and it's halfway around the race before you suddenly realise you're actually in the race. So I think that warming up, if you can't get in the water to warm up, then warming up on land will suffice. It's not as good, but it definitely does work.
So going for a jog, doing stretching, doing dynamic exercises,
exactly,
is just as good almost.
No, for sure.
Much better,
The next question we've got on here is from a chap, and I really hope this is his real name. I'd love it if it's his real name. Called Rickus Maximus. Was that Life of Brian? So, Rickus Maximus, very welcome to the Facebook Live. So, Rickus has said, I completed the marathon last year, and whilst the stops at the locks were good, how did everyone else fuel between stops, especially on the 6K leg? I'm just going to frame that a little bit. So we've got 3 feed stations on the Thames Marathon. The first one at Hamilton, 4K, 4K at Hamilton Lock. We've got the next one down at Hurley, and then the next one at Temple. And Rickus is quite right, a 6K gap in between Hamilton and Hurley. So there's a 6K leg. Now, just tell us your thoughts about that. Is 6K? Should he be thinking about trying to take something on board in that time, or should he be able to go that distance if you feel properly at Hamilton?
I think the general answer to the question is that we carry on board. Much of what we're using in that marathon is glycogen, which we store within the muscles in the liver, circulating glucose. And then also there'll be an addition of fat in there as well. But invariably, just the speed that we're swimming at, it's heavily glycogen dependent. Well, what we know is actually for a marathon, for circa sort of 2 to 3 hours of exercise, we actually carry enough on board. So in general, for the marathon, there is really no need to take on anything. I think what you are doing really is, in essence, when you are taking on things, what you're doing is you're just topping up a little bit. You're probably just changing the flavour and the feel of the mouth. And that's why it's important and actually very personal what it is that you take on board during the race itself. But I think generally there's no real need to take on a huge amount. In fact, if you watch elite marathon runners, for example, what you see is invariably what they're taking on is they're taking on little and often. But when I mean little, I'm talking mouthfuls, and that's generally fluid. It doesn't tend to be solids when you watch the elites race. Solids can bring a little bit of satiety.
Two and a bit hours.
Two and a bit hours, So obviously, if you're out there for a little bit longer, it depends on how quickly you're swimming. Other things that matter are water temperature and air temperature. If dehydration is an issue, then just again little and often with the fluid helps as well. But I think fundamentally the most important thing here is actually about practice. Is that what you should be doing is that people should be practicing their race strategy in training. If you practice that strategy, you'll get it right as you're going through. So don't just turn up on race day and a couple of things. Don't just turn up on race day and just have a guess at what you should be feeding out or fluid and taking in. And equally, if there is something specific that you want, actually talk to people to make sure that you can get hold of that along the way.
I mean, what we totally agree. What we've noticed, on race day is that the top guys and girls, as they're going through,